Peace, family. It's your brother, Marc Lamont Hill. Thanks so much for joining me on the Marc Lamont Hill official YouTube channel. We're here to talk about some of the big stories that have been going on all week in Black America, especially in pop culture this week. I want to talk about them because they have bigger implications. You know, sometimes people say, why y'all talking about pop culture when so much is going on in the world? Well, first of all, on this channel, ain't no shortage of stuff going on in the world that we could talk about. And it's up here. I got stuff on Congo. I got stuff on Palestine. I got stuff on Congress. I got stuff on reparations. There's no shortage of conversations. Make sure you check it out. And if you have checked it out before, hit the like button right now. Let me know that you show up to Marc Lamont Hill's official YouTube channel and actually look at the content. If you haven't, I want you to hit the subscribe button right now. We're going to talk about it. But a few stories have come up this week that I think are worth talking about because they all kind of hover around the same topics. The first thing that we're going to talk about this week, Cam'ron rejects Melyssa Ford's apology. All right, I'm going to give y'all a quick backstory for those that don't know what happened. Cam'ron and Mace have an amazing podcast, an amazing TV show. It Is What It Is, where they talk about sports and other stuff. Well, this is one of those days where they talked about other stuff. And Cam'ron ends up telling a story about him and Mace and some of their sexual escapades back in the day. I won't get into the specifics of it, but it got a little bit graphic, and it had to do with them being inside of a brothel or a place where people are engaged in sex work. So Cam and Mace tell this story, and then a lot of people spread the word. They talked about it on the internet. And then one of the places where Cam and Mace's story got talked about was the Joe Budden podcast. And there was lots of conversation about the story, whether the story is appropriate or not. All this stuff is all part of the mix of whether Cam and Mace should have talked about the story and what the story means. In the midst of Joe Budden and his colleagues talking about what happened, Melyssa Ford raises the question. And those that don't know Melyssa Ford is a former video model. She's a former real estate agent, and she is a television host and podcast host. She was with Jason Lee over at Hollywood Unlocked at one point. Now she's with Joe Budden's podcast. And Melyssa Ford raises the question and said, well, she doesn't raise the question. She says, she basically suggested there was a good chance that there might be underage girls in the spot that Cam'ron and Mace were situated in. Now, her colleagues on the show said, you shouldn't say that. They pushed back immediately. They're basically saying you have no reason, no basis in fact to say that. And for what I understand, Joe Budden even gave her an opportunity to kind of retract it and even maybe not even air it. But instead, she stood 10 toes. Melyssa stood 10 toes. And it didn't go the way she wanted it to. Cam'ron and Mace initially responded to it, and they were somewhat gracious about it, saying, look, there was no basis to say that. This wasn't true. Why are you saying this? Melyssa Ford then pops back up on the next episode of the Joe Budden podcast, and she says, I owe you an apology. She doesn't qualify the apology. She says, I was wrong. I shouldn't have said that. Joe Budden and them said, hey, you know, Cam and Mace were very generous to you. They could have jumped out the window on this. They didn't. You should feel good about this. And you think situation's over. Then Cam comes back. And now Cam is more in full Killer Cam mode. He's like, he's clowning Joe Budden's crew, saying they washed. He's saying he didn't want Melyssa Ford to touch him when they took a picture near each other. And he's saying he does not accept the apology. And he's saying he's considering suing them for defamation of character. So there's so much here to unpack, but I'm going to say just a couple of things here, because one, I know most of the players here. I know Joe Budden. I know Melyssa Ford. I know Cam'ron. We're not friends, but we know each other. We've shown love to each other on social media, and he's been a good brother as far as I can tell. So, you know, the first thing I would say to all of them is, let's arrive at a place of peace. I don't want this to turn to a podcast battle. I don't want this to turn to a rap battle. There's a space right now where there's a lot of content creators out there who are making great content and supporting each other. I love that Cam and Mace show up for Wallow and Gilly, and Gilly and Wallow show up for Joe Budden when things got bad for Gilly when his son, rest in peace, passed away. There was a way that everybody's kind of in the same space, and just like white men and women don't have to be at war with each other to have multiple corporations and companies, Black folk don't either. So I'm very happy to see that space, and I don't want to see that get upset by this. Let's talk about what was actually said. Melyssa Ford said, how do we not know? She raised the possibility that there could have been underage girls in this brothel, in what Cam calls a whorehouse. Melyssa Ford is not wrong. Sex trafficking is a huge part of the sex work industry in the United States. Because sex work is illegal, lots of regulations and oversight that would normally happen do not happen. And so it's not implausible that there were underage girls in this place. The problem, let me be very clear, the problem, though, is that Melyssa Ford didn't make a basic sort of sociological observation about what's going on in this place that she's never been to. Instead, she said it in a way that would make it seem as if Cameron and Mace were involved in some kind of illegal activity with these underage girls. Now, you can make the argument that any kind of sex work in the United States, especially back then, was illegal. But there's a big difference between consensual sex with an adult. There's a big difference between consensual sex with an adult and what Melyssa Ford was implying. So Melyssa Ford was absolutely wrong and reckless with her words to imply or suggest that Cameron and Mace were involved in something that there's no basis in fact for doing. And at a moment where men, particularly Black men, are being attacked, where they are being prosecuted, where they are being charged and they're being sued for all kinds of sexual misconduct, we have to be careful, or as they say in the 4 agreements, we have to be impeccable with our word. So she was wrong to do that. Now, if she had said, look, Cam and Mace don't have anything to do with what I'm about to say, but we have to be very careful in brothels and whorehouses to make sure, as they called it, I don't call people whores, but to use their language, if that's what's happening, they need to be careful that there are underage girls there, because sometimes they sneak people in through sex trafficking from other countries. Sometimes people lie about their age, and some people, not Cam and Mace, but some people actually go looking for that kind of thing. That's their twist. So if she had said those things and just said that as an observation about those kinds of places, nobody would have been mad. But she made it seem as if she had some good faith reason to believe that Cam and Mace were involved in something improper at that level. Now, Melyssa Ford offered an apology. I think a sincere one. And Cameron said no. There's a lesson in that. You don't have to accept people's apology. And people don't have to accept your apology. You apologize because it's the right thing to do. You apologize because you did harm. You apologize because you want to restore ma'at, as we say in my old school circles, or you want to create peace. That's why you do it. But you don't. But you don't apologize as a way of just making things go away. And people have a right to say, I don't accept it. Now, let's move to the other part of the story. There were plenty of things in Cam and Mace's story that were worth criticizing. First of all, the idea that Cam and Mace are in the place in the first place for some people is a moral objection. You know, some feminists and others argue, you know, sex work is labor, fine. But nobody deserves to get slapped. And when Cam tells the story and Mace says he hit the girl for not performing an act on him the way she was doing it on Cam, that's an objectionable part of the story. That's the part that's wild to me. That's the part that's inappropriate. Again, we shouldn't be, there is so much stuff with that story that's problematic. You know, we should be bringing up questions of consent. We should be raising the question of, you know, when you go into a place like this, are people being exploited? What harm is being done? You know, to what extent are people in such vulnerable circumstances that they can't make informed agentic choices? There's so much wrong with the Cam Mace story on that show. And I was actually disappointed to hear that story because It's a sports show. And it's a fun show. And to bring that in to me was way out of bounds. Again, I'm not defending Cam and Mace. I'm simply saying that there's multiple things that need to be unpacked here. And I think we actually are focused so much on Melyssa Ford's lack of precision, the lack of precision in her analysis by saying, how do we know they were underage girls? Or as if almost implying that they were with underage girls, that we can lose sight of the bigger issue here, right? Which is that these places are rife with sex trafficking, rife with Black and brown girls being exploited, rife with abuse happening. Just because someone is a sex worker doesn't mean that they should be abused, doesn't mean they should be disrespected, doesn't mean that they should be harmed. And that's where the criticism should be. But instead, we're all going to be focused on a rap beef. I see y'all have comments and questions coming in. Let me get to some of them. Also, Itchy Brain, thanks so much for joining the MLH family, joining and becoming a new member. Man, I appreciate the love and the support. Mace is really falling away from the church. He said, what are we talking about here? The story was essentially about assaulting a sex worker. The way this is being framed is wild. I think you might be missing my point, or maybe I'm not articulating my point properly. My whole point is that the story is being framed wrong. That's exactly the point I'm making. Instead of talking about the harm that happened to a sex worker or the broader issue of what it means to even have sex work be a form of labor that people engage in, we're talking about the lack of precision in Melyssa Ford's description. And I'm saying that's the wrong conversation to have. I think it's fair to say, hey, Melyssa, you don't, both as a legal matter and as just a matter of how we engage one another, I think it's okay to say, yo, like, you can't just imply that this guy was with an underage person. I think that's okay to say, but that shouldn't be the centerpiece. The centerpiece of the conversation should be what happened to this girl. That's the point I'm making. I thought that I was making that clearly. It sounds like I haven't, and I'm okay with that. This should have been the start of the conversation, not a critique of what Melyssa said. Again, for me, I'm responding to the headline, right? The headline, the latest development in the story, which was 3 days ago, was Cameron rejects Melyssa Ford's apology, and he's breaking down why. He's also saying that he might sue for what is it, defamation of character. I don't know much about that. If there's a lawyer here, is that defamation? She didn't say that he did anything. She said that we don't know that there weren't underage girls in the place where he was. So I'm not sure that it's actually defamation. And I don't know how defamation works when you're talking about being engaged in an illegal activity, which I believe, to my knowledge, there are no legal sex work spaces back then in the 90s outside of Las Vegas. So if I'm wrong on that, please clear me up, let me know. But the point I'm making is we actually have to have a more sophisticated conversation. Tatiana Monet says, did Melyssa say they were sleeping with underage women? No, that's my point. So I'm not sure it's actually defamation. The implication was there, and I get why in this era people would be extra careful about that and extra concerned about that. But I don't think she actually accused them of anything. But it doesn't sound like defamation to me, but it does sound like an opportunity for a conversation. And it seems to me that we're talking about everything but the actual thing we should be talking about. The thing we should actually be talking about is sex work. The thing we should actually be talking about is violence against sex workers. But we're focused on Melyssa Ford's apology. I'm not saying that's Melyssa's fault. I'm not saying, well, if Melyssa had only framed it right, we'd have the right conversation. I suspect if Melyssa had framed it right, we still wouldn't be having the right conversation. But I think we have an opportunity as people who consume pop culture to raise the level of dialogue. Somebody said here, they're leveraging Melyssa to beef with each other and clout chase for attention. I don't know if that's true or not, but I do see right now that all the headlines, all the stories are about their beef. And that's why, for me, it's like, okay, we can enter from that space, but we need to have a deeper, more interesting conversation. Let's see here. Somebody said, love you, fam. You're in the wrong team. No, you need to take the red pill and join the fight for men's fathers' rights. Look, there's a whole world in Twitter. There's a whole world on YouTube of, I guess y'all call yourselves red pillars, who fight for men's and fathers. Look, men do deserve rights. Fathers do deserve rights. But my concern, brother, is that circle, that network of people who talk about men's rights and fathers' rights, it's often just a space of misogyny. It's often just a space of hyper patriarchy. It's often a space of talking about black women ain't shit. It's often disrespecting or dressing down black women. I've never enjoyed those spaces. I've never found them to be healthy spaces. That's not to say that everything that's said in those spaces is untrue. Of course not. There's no space that's entirely untrue or false or anything like that. But nah, the manosphere ain't for me, Playboy. Christian Alexander TV said, here's the thing, Mark. She had no reason or innuendo to even mention that even a little bit. There was simply no reason to say, well, here's where it gets complicated, though, Christian. Whenever we talk about sex work, we have to talk about exploitation. Whenever we talk about even paid legal sex work in a place like Las Vegas, for example, or in Amsterdam, there's still an industry underneath it that's often underground. There is a very good chance if you walk into any strip club in urban America, you're going to find an underage girl. You're going to find a 16-year-old pretending to be a 20-year-old, or you're going to find a 15, 16-year-old who has been exploited and kidnapped virtually and told to act like she's 19 or 20. So it's not just some bad little girl, which is how we often spin this stuff, but it's somebody who's been kidnapped, somebody who's been taken, somebody who's in an abusive relationship, who's being forced to do this kind of labor. These aren't exceptions. These are kind of the norm, brother. So no, I disagree. I think that Melyssa raised an interesting question. I just think it's better. I just don't think we have to. I think we can raise it in a way that doesn't imply something that takes us here, you know? But I don't think the conversation itself was totally problematic. If I was Melyssa, I would be like, you coming for me and you admitted to slapping a woman because you had bad sexual. That's my point. That should be what we're all talking about. Now, Cameron and Mace may have a different take on that. Joe Budden may have a different take on that. Ish may have a different take on that. Melyssa may have a different take on that. All the different people on the show may have a different take on that. That's what they should be talking about. And we should be raising the level of conversation to that as opposed to focusing on this part of it. Let's see here. What else we got? All right, let's move on. We can move on to another story because I still got two more stories to talk about here. The next one is Russell Simmons. Russell Simmons denies allegations of sex assault and says that he's never been violent. He says that, by the way, Russell Simmons did an interview recently, in depth with Graham Benzinger. And he basically says that all of the sex allegations that have been levied against him are false. He says that, yeah, I've been crude. Yeah, I've been rude. Yeah, I've been disrespectful. Yeah, I've been awful in certain ways, but I have never sexually assaulted anybody. He says, I've had sex with like thousands of women and only like a handful are accusing me of this. And he says that he's taken 9 lie detector tests, which prove his innocence. Woo. Russell Simmons is a fascinating figure. I don't know if any of you have seen Drew Dixon's documentary on HBO about this, but there are several things here. One, Russell Simmons has been accused of sexual assault, rape, etc., by numerous women. I know some of those women. I have spoken to some of those women. Some of those women are my friends, my close friends. Some of the women who are my close friends who have told me these stories have never come public with these stories. They simply are telling me these stories because they wanted me to know the harm that was committed against them, not because they wanted money, not because they want attention. They haven't said a word. I'm fascinated at the number of people who will rush to the defense of Russell Simmons and ignore the word of all of these people, all of these women who have spoken out, often with similar stories. Again, I ask you all to watch the documentary on HBO, if you can, if you want to. It's called On the Record. And it's a lot of women who come forward and they have very similar stories. And these women have never met each other before. I am not here on the record saying Russell Simmons is guilty. I cannot legally do that. What I will tell you is numerous women have told me their stories. They have articulated their pain. They have shared the assaults that happened to them that they allege came from Russell Simmons. And I have no reason to think that they're not telling the truth. What's interesting, though, is that Russell says, we took lie detector tests. I don't think Russell is necessarily lying about taking a lie detector test. He may have taken a lie detector test. And I don't think it's just that a lie detector test is technically faulty or technologically imprecise. We don't have to just say, well, maybe the test was wrong or maybe he gamed the test. It's quite possible that Russell Simmons answered the questions honestly and just has no idea what consent is, that he has no idea what sexual assault is, that he has no idea what the boundaries are. I don't know. Again, I'm not making a claim about Russell Simmons. I'm making a claim about the fact that in this society, which is a rape culture society, many people, especially men, don't know what consent is. So, for example, if somebody meets a woman at a bar and she's had 15 drinks and he brings her home and has sex, what he considers to be sex with her, and then a week later they give him a lie detector test and say, "Did you sexually assault that woman?" He would say no, and he passed the lie detector test. Why? Because he doesn't think he did anything wrong. But the woman was not sober, and so she could not have given consent. You get my point? So passing a lie detector test may mean something to somebody, but it doesn't necessarily even mean that he hasn't done exactly what he's accused of doing. I'm just saying it doesn't mean that. And by the way, it's not like 6 people, as he says. He's been accused of sexual misconduct by at least 15 women. And Russell Simmons says, of course, I've been insensitive, but certainly never been forceful in any of my relationships, all of which all that I've had have been consensual. Again, that is very different than numerous women, including some who did not come forward. Yeah, I'll just leave it there. Russell Simmons said, I did 9 of them, talking about lie detector tests. It's pretty clear that I don't believe it. I even asked, well, what if I believe it, but it's not true? He said, your subconscious will get you. Yeah, your subconscious gets you when you actually deep down think that you did something wrong. The point here is that it's not a subconscious issue. It's a rape culture issue. We live in a society that absolutely supports and endorses rape in lots of different ways. I see people in the comments still talking about Melyssa Ford, still talking about Cameron, etc. But yo, this is exactly what I'm thinking. So John just wrote in, and the sister says, wow, America needs a consent class. I think that's right. We need a class on consent. We need a cultural shift on consent. When I hear the stories from Russell Simmons, some of them are about power. Some of them are not about physical violence. They're about coercive violence. And others are different. So we definitely need the class, but we also don't want to act like this is just a cultural clash or a misunderstanding, right? There are women here who are making very powerful and pervasive claims about Russell Simmons. Russell Simmons saying his whole life has been ruined. His professional career has been ended by this, that he's been forced to kind of move to the margins of society because of this. Well, I don't think that's true. Yeah, I'm sure there's certain business he can't get. I'm sure there's certain deals he can't do. Good. But there's also a lot of people who still stand next to Russell Simmons. You go on Instagram, you go on YouTube, you go everywhere, and you see nothing but Russell Simmons love. Big rappers are on here caping for him. Big rappers said, I don't know if he would do it. I had a conversation, I won't say who it was, but with one rapper who was very close to Russell Simmons. He said, Russell did a lot for me, and I don't know what I should do. Why can't I stand next to him? And I explained to him, I said, he's accused of all of these things. He said, oh, how do you know the women aren't lying? I said, when Black men say that they've been beaten by the police, no videotape, just when we're beaten by the police. When Black men say that the police officer shot me, my hands were up. We don't run around saying, oh, how do we know Mike Brown's hands weren't down or up? Or how do we know he wasn't charging an officer? How do we know Trayvon Martin wasn't about to kill George Zimmerman, right? We believe them. We don't wait to the court hearing. We don't investigate the evidence. We believe them. why do we have such a difficulty believing women? Again, doesn't mean that claims that shouldn't be examined. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't ask tough questions. It doesn't mean that men should be presumed to be guilty every time, but it means that we don't begin from a place of dismissal of women. Anyway, let's move to another story here. Tiffany Red sends an open letter to Diddy. Tiffany Red sends an open letter to Diddy. Tiffany Red, if you don't know, is a songwriter, and she is a friend of Cassie, and she made a decision to back up the claims that Cassie made in her lawsuit accusing Diddy of rape, of sex trafficking, and of physical abuse. Some of y'all know her. She's been a writer for Jennifer Hudson. She's been a writer for other people. And she published an open letter in Rolling Stone magazine. And here's what she said. She said, throughout my time knowing Cassie, I've seen many concerning instances. There are occasions when I heard you, talking to Diddy, yelling at her and making threats. Observed her so high, I was afraid of her overdosing at a party you threw for her in Malibu. And I witnessed you two getting IVs after a different night of partying. This is an open letter she writes to Diddy. She says, I fear for my safety as her suit alludes to me, although not by name. I hope that revealing my identity to the public will afford me some measure of protection. So she's doing two things here. And this is where the Diddy story gets even more powerful and also even more scary. She's saying Cassie's not lying, despite all the people in the world who still might not believe Cassie. She's saying Cassie's not lying. But frankly, from what I can see, there weren't a lot of people saying Cassie's lying. Usually with sexual assault cases, usually with controversies like this, you get a lot of people out there that'll be like, nah, that don't sound like him. Nah, that ain't how my homie works. Nah, that's my brother. He would never do that. Oh, I've known him for 30 years. I've never seen anything like that with him. We didn't get a lot of that with Diddy. Most people ain't say nothing. So I'm not sure that her primary reason is the first thing. I think her primary reason might be the second thing that she said, and that is that Cassie was talking about me in the lawsuit. And certainly Diddy knows, I'm speaking for Tiffany Red right now. Certainly Diddy knows that Cassie was talking about me. So if there's a retribution, if there's a revenge thing going on, it's going to happen against me. And I don't want to turn up missing. So I want to put my name on the record. So if I disappear, nobody will be surprised. But also, maybe if people know that my name is on the record, they'll be less likely to exact revenge on me. This is some interesting stuff here. The world has painted a picture of Sean Combs, of Diddy, not of being a shiny suit wearing, rap aficionado, not of being a lighthearted party throwing man about town, but of effectively being not just a sociopath, not just a purveyor of sexual and violence and all kinds of other stuff, but also of somebody who's willing to exact revenge. The accusations of blowing up Kid Cudi's car, these accusations that are circulating that I'm not going to spread by getting into the specifics, but people are accusing Diddy of all kinds of unthinkable things. And the fact that Tiffany Red actually feels the need to put her name in public and say, hey, this ain't me, kind of lends credibility to that, right? Like, even if it's like she had no reason to come forward other than to say, hey, I just don't want to get killed. Now, I'm not saying she was going to get killed. I'm saying that she clearly worries about violence or some other revenge happening to her. Diddy earlier this week put something up on his Instagram page, basically saying, enough. I'm tired of people slandering my name, my legacy. I'm going to fight back soon. I'm going to speak out soon, but I just want to say everything is untrue. Stories like this are going to do as much damage to that legacy and to that reputation as the actual Cassie stuff. All over the internet, you got people like Eugene, his former bodyguard speaking out. You got his former head of security speaking out. You got rappers. You got people like Harrison. What's my man's name? He used to be on Scandal. We did a video on him, but we got plenty of people coming out speaking against Diddy. So you got to balance that with whatever Diddy's going to come out with. But he's not coming out with a lot of moral support. He's not coming out with a lot of character references. So as Russell Simmons is saying, look, this ruined my career and my status, Diddy now has to ask the question, what's my future look like? Because this isn't like 1995 where you get an allegation and it passes away, or this isn't even like 2015 where you say something and you get sued and people kind of forget about it. We're in a moment where people are doubling and tripling down. This is serious stuff. And I'm not sure the public will be forgiving to Diddy. I'm not sure how long it will take, but if at all. But for Diddy to recover from this, it's going to take some honesty, some accountability, some transparency. I'm not sure if he's capable of that on this issue. I don't know if he wants to do that on this issue. I don't know. What I do know is when more people come up and give corroborating stories like Tiffany Red just did, it does a lot of damage. It does a lot of damage. Anyway, y'all, hit the like button right now. Hit the subscribe button right now. If you want to be part of Marc Lamont Hill official YouTube channel, just hit the subscribe button. I'd love for you to join, though. I'd love for you to be part of the family so that every day, every week, you get to be part of the conversation that we have. Because every day, every week, we put our conversation on politics, on pop culture. But again, you can go any place else and get a gossip site. I ain't here to gossip. I'm here to raise the level of conversation. I'm here to ask radical and critical questions about the world. And I want y'all to do that with me. So we'll talk about Diddy or Cassie or Russell Simmons or R. Kelly, whatever. But we're going to do it at a higher level. We're going to ask the questions that the mainstream media aren't asking. We're going to ask the questions that the podcasters aren't asking. This ain't supposed to be for media. This is for radical education. So we're going to do all of that stuff, but we can do it right here with your support. So hit the join button right now. Even at the bronze level, it does a whole lot for us, especially at the bronze level, because that means everybody's getting in on the ground floor. There's something that's special here, I do believe. But if you don't do that, at least just hit the subscribe button right now. And if you don't feel ready to subscribe, even though I'd love for you to hit that red button right now, all you got to do is hit the like button right now. Let YouTube know that you appreciate this type of content and that you want more of it so we can spread the word around the globe. All right, family, I'll see y'all later. Peace.